Cities are expensive things to run. You have ongoing costs like garbage collection or street cleaning, as well as big one-time projects like extending a subway line or building a brand new school. When you slam in a new neighborhood on the outskirts of a city, you obviously access a lot of things in the one-time category: roads, sewers, and transit services. So who's gonna pay for all that? Well, in Ontario, the slogan you hear is "Growth pays for growth," because these one-time costs are paid for by new housing developments with a thing called development charges. These are fees on new real estate projects. So let's have a look at how this works and doesn't in the city that puts the H in GTHA. Hamilton receives just over $115 million per year from these charges on development. It breaks down into many categories, with the largest being water services and roading. The money doesn't have to be spent in any particular ward of the city. It's a large chunk of change sitting there, allocated to be spent on new sewers anywhere.
So I can understand why you do this. For one, it means existing residents are less likely to resent new developments, making their property taxes higher. There are also arguments to be made that it reduces the likeliness of building excessive capacity. But it's unavoidable that the costs have become very significant. Between $22,000 and $63,000 of just development charges are being added to every home built in Hamilton. And the hammer isn't even that bad. Toronto is between $36,000 and $94,000.
For a while, I figured there must be something fishy going on, like a municipal government pushing more and more things onto development charges that should just be paid for in existing property taxes. But in Canada, development charges can really only be used for growth related to capital costs. Municipal siphoning for operating costs seems to be a minor factor.
The charges going up is a product of two things. First, increasingly including things that are not strictly necessary for growth that have themselves become expensive. In 2013, Toronto's development charges didn't have a shelter fee, which now adds an average of $613 per unit built. And the subsidised housing line item increased faster than any other between 2013 and 2021, going up 771%. The baseline thing, though, is the less talked about part of the housing crisis. There is a shortage of construction labour and materials, so most city things have gotten more expensive too.
The bigger debate with allocating development charges comes from the pooling of all the charges in one fund. If a new house is at the edge of town like this in a greenfield, and an equivalent house is downtown, the sewer funding contribution is the same. But clearly the new subdivision house and the infill house aren't going to have the exact same cost to the city.
Recently there have been some changes to differentiate charges based on the density, but these haven't really done much to help the cause of density devotees. A recent CMHC study looking at Toronto, Vancouver and Montreal found that
the single detached home tends to be the housing type subject to the lowest government fees. This seems to run contrary to densification efforts being pursued by municipalities.
And that seems to be a problem.
Being from Montreal, I hadn't heard the line "growth pays for growth" before, because that's not how Montreal pays for new infrastructure. But in Ontario, people just throw that term around like, of course growth pays for growth. But why?
Growth paid for growth.
Growth paying for growth.
Growth pays for growth.
There are real problems with these development charges and the related density charges and impact fees. I think people have forgotten that growth pays for growth is just a slogan. This wasn't brought down from Mount Sinai on a stone tablet. What growth pays for growth really means is existing residents don't pay for growth. And why? Existing homeowners in Canada are on average more affluent members of our society. Why wouldn't they help cover costs? In fact, here's some food for thought. Impact charges, as they're called in the States, had their last big expansion during the taxpayer revolts of the neoliberal Reagan era. But these charges really do make new housing more expensive. According to Michael Stegman,
when most communities in a market adopt roughly equivalent impact fees,
which is the case in Ontario,
the developer's costs will likely be passed on in the form of higher prices or rents.
There is the obvious reason for this. If you tack on $100,000 in fees, the developer passes that on to the buyer. Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
But it also means the whole market builds less housing. If the developers didn't have this money tied up in all their projects, they'd have the ability to finance more housing at once. They want to put as much money as they can to work. And development charges mean, at any one time in Ontario, over $2 billion is frozen and then ultimately billed to the buyers of new housing.
So there are good reasons to push back on development charges, and there is a powerful lobby pushing those reasons onto the desks of politicians. The lobbying paid off when Bill 23 was signed into law. This packed piece of legislation deals with lots of things. One of them was the removal of development charges. Well, good night everybody. No more development charges. See you all next week. Oh wait! Removal of development charges on affordable housing. Well, that's different. So their definition of affordable housing is not deeply affordable, which is why activist groups who promote very low-income housing don't like it. It instead removes development charges from non-profit development. So for-profit developers, they're still building condos, still paying development charges. Bill 23 is actually fairly meek on this. The one thing they are getting is a temporary reduction in development charges over the next few years and a discount for larger family-sized rental units. So for regular builders, Bill 23 is more bedrooms built sooner.
Now the flip side of this is that development charges also help pay for the development of affordable housing, and you can no longer charge for this purpose. So it's a bit of a trade-off. No development charges for non-profits, but then also an important source of income for non-profit housing is removed.
Looking at Hamilton's current development charge reserve funds, only 3.9% is set aside to fund housing. It's not a large component of what development charges are for. But non-profit developers in many jurisdictions already had development charges waived. So for them, this really just leaves them with less in their pockets. During this whole debate, people talk about pockets so much. Developers keep more money in their pocket, taking from pockets, putting in pockets. Taxpayers now on the hook for the shortfall being hit in the pocketbook. But maybe rather than talking about what pocketbook should be getting pickpocketed for political points, we should ask, are development charges even the way to do this? The same CMHC study shows that in Montreal, government fees are much lower for developers. So how does Montreal pay for all its new public infrastructure and services? Well, instead of billing new home buyers, the burden is more evenly shared in regular property taxes. And there are good reasons why Montreal, until relatively recently, has kept fees low for new housing.
The higher prices at which established homeowners can sell their houses will compensate them for the higher prices they may have to pay for houses in the same market. Renters, on the other hand, receive no such capital gains. Their higher rents are, in effect, an uncompensated burden that stems from the private financing of infrastructure to serve new residents.
So could Ontario and other regions of North America move away from private financing paying for growth?
Well, let's see how they're handling the first baby step of not getting non-profits to pay for growth.
The impact of this bill on the municipal taxpayer is simply staggering.
The notion of having it all paid for through property taxes is just not, I don't think, viable.
Our taxpayers are the ones that are going to be hit like hell.
So let's run the numbers on the City of Toronto based on their estimates and current property tax revenue. Oh, watch out homeowners, hold on to your car keys because your property taxes could go up by a whopping 5%. Based on the average assessed values of homes in Toronto, that means we're talking about $210. Oh God, call the Jesus, but I'm just the humble owner of a bungalow that is now worth $2 million. Oh, why did we fund our city with development charges on affordable and rental housing? Yeah, that's it. The reason it works out to such a low number is because property taxes in Ontario are low.
Homeowners in Toronto like having extremely low property taxes. It's actually even better that it makes new supply more expensive.
I hope everybody enjoys the next 4 years because we'll all be thrown out. They'll blame us.
The train wreck bill.
When there's high property tax bills moving forward, I'm not going to take the blame.
Big hit to your wallet. Approximately $300 to $600.
This thing is the most devastating thing I've ever read in my life.
Thousands of lights were burning on the green branches, and gaily coloured pictures such as she had seen in the shop windows looked down upon her. The little maiden stretched out her hands towards them. When the match went out, the lights on the Christmas tree rose higher and higher, and she saw them now as stars in heaven. One fell down and formed a long trail of fire. "Someone is just dead," said the little girl. For her old grandmother, the only person who had loved her, and who was now no more, had told her that when a star falls, a soul ascends to God. She drew another match against the wall. It was again light, and in the lustre there stood the old grandmother, so bright and radiant, so mild and with such an expression of love. "Grandmother," cried the little one, "oh, take me with you. You go away when the match burns out. You vanish like the warm stove, like the delicious roast goose, and like the magnificent Christmas tree." And she rubbed the whole bundle of matches against the wall, for she wanted to be quite sure of keeping her grandmother near her. And the matches gave such a brilliant light that it was brighter than at noonday. Never formerly had the grandmother been so beautiful and so tall. She took the little maiden on her arm, and both flew in brightness and in joy, so high, so very high, and then above was neither cold, nor hunger, nor anxiety. They were with God. But in the corner, at the cold hour of dawn, sat the poor girl, with rosy cheeks and with a smiling mouth, leaning against the wall, but frozen to death on the last evening of the old year. Stiff and stark sat the child there with her matches, of which one bundle had been burnt. She wanted to warm herself, people said, and they looked one to another in that sombre congregation, until one learned among them proclaimed, "This, surely, is almost as devastating as when our property taxes went up by several %."
But of course, taxpayers are not going to be happy about paying more tax. So John Tory applied his weird, frustrated lawyer pressure on the province. Housing Minister Steve Clark responded, promising that the local municipalities would be made whole. This means for a couple of weeks, we got fun Canadian accents saying the key operative phrase, made whole, again and again.
The minister has said that we would be made whole. Has the government made us whole?
With John Tory having, in my opinion, the best made whole in Canada.
Ensuring the City of Toronto is made whole. Keeping the city whole. Keeping us whole. Keep us whole. 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 Make us whole. Kept whole. Making us whole. Left us with a huge hole. Keep us whole. Here's what keeping us whole means. Kept whole. We will be kept whole. Keep us whole. They've said they'll keep us whole.
Now, made whole is obviously intentionally a bit vague. And the lawyer in John Tory is clearly fixated on the interpretation of
make us whole
and the fulfillment of that promise.
I'm assuming that means what any, I think, common sense, normal interpretation of those words would mean.
And I have a guess about the fulfillment. There is a pattern with these reforms on housing around the world. It's always a barrage of things being done at the same time. For example, in California, SB 50 was proposed, which was quite extensive and drew a lot of stings from a swarm of Californianized NIMBYs who successfully protected their nests from it. But a year later, 2 different bills allowing duplexes and rapid permitting managed to slip through. In Minneapolis, they ended detached single-family zoning, which was a big milestone, but the reason rents are dropping in Minneapolis is because at the same time parking minimums were eliminated and densification was done along transit corridors. This government has a similar batch of bills approach, lining up one thing after another, watching the fallout, and then proposing the next thing. The phrase made whole is intentionally vague to give them some flexibility with their next moves.
Every year of a re-elected Doug Ford government is going to have a supply action plan bill on the table to increase housing supply.
So what could the next move be? Well, there's one thing that would make a lot of sense. In Ontario, there is a serious issue with municipalities not meeting growth targets. Every few years, the provincial government, based on projected population growth, allocates an expectation for each municipality with a number of housing units it wants to see built. Then municipalities, to the absolute worst of their abilities, fail to achieve it. Between 2011 and 2021, only the City of Toronto in the whole region met its target. The consequence for failure, from what I can tell, is nothing. Cities can make official plans for days, but in the end, there are so many places along the housing supply chain where elected officials and municipal bureaucracies can stop housing from happening. What this promise to make whole could be is a restructured incentive to meet development targets. It's pretty simple. Here is the make whole money, but you only get it when you meet your target. Holding cities to their target with a financial incentive while also creating a predictable flow of money that cities can use to build new developments. If the province doesn't do this and just writes a check for the shortfall, then Doug Ford made a bad deal and gave away something for nothing.
If they do follow through and give that cash back in this form, it would be a big windfall for non-profit and affordable housing developers. They get to have the same money but be able to go through a system that lets them build anywhere in the province, but with less public opposition and no development charges.
In the end, through cheapness and a lack of financing options, the municipalities of Ontario have chosen to be dependent first on developers to finance infrastructure and now on the province. This is not an enviable position. What happens when population growth tapers off and developers slow down development? What happens if a provincial government decides it's done making holes? But if a city had a higher density and larger tax base, it would be less exposed to changes from these external forces. Hopefully, the provincial government can use financial incentives and loans to make cities like Hamilton move away from growth pays for growth and towards Hamilton plans for growth.
We will be kept whole, so we won't be short any money. So I'd rather not condemn or do anything else that you would like to do, because it's great theater.
Oh, stop.
I'd rather not.
Okay, on the no, we're ready to vote now, Councillor Matlow. Sorry, no, sorry, Councillor Matlow. So let's put the motion on the screen by the mayor.
Hey, it's Paige in Ontario on a windy day on the edge of town. Here goes my bus. Staying here for another hour. Let's get into this. Development fees have been skyrocketing in recent years. Nazis don't do both hands. Just Superman.
A recent CMHC study looking at Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal found that the single detached